Reversing medical abortion, a promising treatment for women who choose life after taking an abortion pill. Deadline approaching, Homeland Security funding set to run out this week without an agreement on immigration executive action. New doctor of the church. Armenian Catholics react to the Pope's declaring a 10th century monk and poet a doctor of the church. And iconic photo, the story behind the most recognized image from World War II in the Pacific. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Monday, February 23rd, 2015. Good evening from Washington. Thanks for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick with your news now. Well, the political tug of war continues over President Obama's executive action on immigration. The Justice Department wants a federal judge to lift his order blocking the executive action that shields millions from deportation. Meanwhile, here in Washington, Congress faces a deadline to approve funding for the Department of Homeland Security. Our chief White House correspondent, Susanne LaFrankie, has the story tonight.
Brian, Congress and the president have until Friday night to come up with a solution to continue funding Homeland Security or risk a possible shutdown. The White House says a shutdown would severely harm the nation's ability to fight domestic terror. Republicans, however, say the president has overstepped his authority with his immigration order, and they will not fund DHS until that's out. Speaking to the National Governors Association, President Obama warned the looming shutdown would have far-reaching repercussions.
It will have a direct impact on your economy, and it will have a direct impact on America's national security, because their hard work helps to keep us safe. And as governors, you know that we can't afford to play politics with our national security.
If the House passes their bill, it would fund Homeland Security's $40 billion budget through September. But it would also overturn President Obama's executive action to limit deportations of millions of illegal immigrants in the U.S. House Republicans say Obama has overstepped his authority, and now it's up to the Senate to act. Meanwhile, Democrats in the Senate are blocking their own measure. Republican Governor Bobby Jindal says the president admitted he wasn't pressuring the Senate to vote.
The president did not agree to tell the Democrats to allow there to be a vote, and he said he would veto the bill if it got to him with the language as it's currently written.
Homeland Security Secretary Jay Johnson says the impasse could lead to 30,000 furloughs. That includes FEMA workers who've been battling record snowfall.
Do not tie a debate about immigration to the funding of Homeland Security for this nation.
Congress is getting back to work today, just days before the Homeland Security budget ends, and lawmakers have until the end of the week to approve that budget. But no clear solution or compromise is in sight. From the White House, Susanne LaFrankie, EWTN News Nightly.
Now, some of the other stories our EWTN News Nightly team has been covering in today's world. A group of pro-life doctors hopes to inform Americans of a development in the fight against abortion. They're calling attention to a new procedure they say can reverse the effects of the abortion pill. Wyatt Goolsby is here now with details.
Brian, in years past, reversing the effects of an abortion pill may have seemed impossible. Now a group of pro-life supporters and medical professionals say not only is it possible, but it's often successful.
Meet a healthy, happy, and sleepy 7-week-old Gabriel David. His parents, Andrea and her boyfriend Chris from New Jersey, call him a blessing, but he almost didn't make it. Andrea and Chris were initially scared about facing an unplanned pregnancy.
I just thought that I was just too young. We didn't have the money. We're still living with our parents, and I'm still in school. I just thought it wasn't the right time.
Andrea says she went to a Planned Parenthood and regrettably took an abortion pill. She thought it was too late to save her child, but after finding doctors who support an abortion pill reversal, she was able to stop the process. Now pro-life OBGYNs are getting the word out to doctors across the country.
You see a young woman when she's making that decision for life in her most vulnerable state, and you have the opportunity to step in, and you just see things turning around and changing so much in her life.
Doctors like Mary Davenport have treated women using progesterone, a hormone that allows pregnancy to continue. If used in the right amounts, she says it can reverse the effects of the abortion pill with little risk to the mother and child. Father Frank Pavone with Priests for Life says an abortion pill reversal is an answer to prayers.
It feels a sense of hope, empowerment, and really what the pro-life movement is about replacing despair with hope.
And hope is exactly what Andrea and Chris have right now as they look forward to raising their child.
just to wake up to him every morning and to know that that he loves us and we love him is just absolutely amazing. And I would go through that experience a million more times.
Pro-life OBGYNs who support the abortion pill reversal are hoping to get the support of several hundred more doctors who would be willing to tell their patients about this new procedure. The first abortion pill reversal was performed in 2007, and 78 babies have been born as a result, according to Priests for Life. Brian?
All right, thanks, Wyatt. The pro-life movement loses two key leaders this past weekend. Dr. Jack Wilkie, often called the father of the pro-life movement, died on Friday. He was 89, just a few weeks short of his 90th birthday. He and his wife Barbara founded Right to Life of Greater Cincinnati. Then Wilkie later served as National Right to Life president for a total of 10 years. The Wilkies helped form Right to Life educational efforts with their Wilkie slides and their handbook on abortion. And then Brother Paul O'Donnell also died on Friday. He was only 55. He was the longtime superior of the Franciscan Brothers of Peace of the Archdiocese of St. Paul in Minneapolis. Brother Paul was co-founder and president of Pro-Life Action Ministries. He was a founding board member of Human Life Alliance and the chairman of the Terry Schiavo Life and Hope Network. Pope Francis declares 10th century mystic and poet St. Gregory of Narek Doctor of the Church. It's a gift of sorts for Armenian Catholics. They are commemorating the 100th anniversary of the massacre of Armenians by Ottoman Turks.
Gli armeni noi abbiamo ricordato il genocidio per 25 anni e gridavamo davanti alla politica internazionale.
The head of the Pontifical Armenian College in Rome saying Armenians have been trying to call attention to the genocide for 25 years. This title of Doctor of the Church is reserved for those whose writings have greatly served the Universal Church. There are just 35 doctors of the Church. Pope Francis is on a Lenten retreat. He's away from the Vatican for several days this week. The Holy Father asked for prayers before leaving for Aricia, a suburb of Rome. There, the Pope and his advisors are spending time in prayer, meditation, and reflection. Francis said amid noise and confusion, one hears, quote, only superficial voices. He says while on retreat, we can listen to the voice of Jesus and also correct so many defects we all have. The Church encourages spiritual renewal during Lent in preparation for the celebration of Easter. The death toll from a weekend ferry disaster in central Bangladesh has now risen to 70. About twice that many passengers were thought to be on the ferry when it capsized yesterday. The double-decker was hit by a cargo ship in the Padma River. The ferry's owner was arrested on charges of culpable homicide, unauthorized operation, and overloading. Ferry accidents are common in Bangladesh because of overcrowding and very poor monitoring systems. Well, in just a week, the Supreme Court will hear a case that could dismantle Obamacare, or the Affordable Care Act. King versus Burwell centers on states where the federal government set up insurance exchanges. Now, the Affordable Care Act says only exchanges set up by a state can receive subsidies, but some states did not set up exchanges. The IRS issued a rule allowing people who live in states where federal insurance marketplaces to receive tax credits. That suit claims that is illegal under the health care law. The government says the tax credits are needed for low and middle income families to afford health insurance. Tom Miller is a fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, and Trevor Burrus, an associate editor of the Cato Supreme Court Review. Trevor, explain the brief that you co-authored that basically says the administration broke its own law.
Well, this is a different kind of a challenge because we want them to follow the law, and there were very clear reasons why they would write the law in this way. One of the basic rules of constitutional law is that the government can't just tell states they have to do stuff. They have to give them incentives, and one of the incentives they gave them in this was to not allow subsidies unless the state set up exchanges. Then very surprisingly to the government, a lot of states, 2/3 of the states did not set up exchanges, and so we're here now. So we're asking them to follow the law and to say the law clearly states that only exchanges established by the state get these subsidies, and so the law should be followed and the IRS should not be allowed to break it.
Tom, you moderated an event today. You actively work to find policy alternatives to Obamacare. What happens to the millions of Americans who have signed up under the federal plan with the subsidies, and if the Supreme Court says they're illegal, what happens to them?
Okay, well, step one is to win the lawsuit and win the case. We sometimes skip ahead of that. Then it'll probably be about, at a minimum, 25 days before that order of the Supreme Court finding against the rule would go into effect. There's some additional overtime in terms of people who are currently not paying their premiums. They get a little bit of a grace period. The insurers who may or may not want to escape from their contracts, they have some time for that could spill out. So there's a little more time than just the next day. Nevertheless, members of Congress and their leaders need to be working on this. They are right now. There are 2 working groups. There are proposals and plans. There's not a single one, because you need to find out what people can agree to and what will work. There's going to be a negotiation, but it's going to be a fast negotiation after the court decision comes down. You have to decide on a couple of things. Hold harmless the people who are currently getting subsidies in the middle of a plan year. Can't turn things over overnight, but you need to get something back in return. If you win the lawsuit, which challenges the individual mandate and the employer mandate, you better be asking for not having those restored by putting money back in some other arrangement. There are different ways to subsidize people. Could be done through a state mechanism, could be done through a different type of tax credit mechanism. There are solutions out there. This wasn't done 4 or 5 years ago. It can be done with a new Congress under a different political environment.
Let's go back to the case. What options does the Supreme Court have in this?
Well, they're the Supreme Court. They can do almost anything they want, but it's fairly limited here, and it's also not very ideological. The ideology is at the background of this always, but if this is a run-of-the-mill statutory interpretation case, the Supreme Court hears these all the time on bankruptcy code, but it doesn't have all these political overtones about Obamacare. So that means that the alignment could be very unpredictable. Now, what they could do, they could also, one thing that Tom mentioned, they could stay their ruling. They could say the IRS has to follow can't do this, we have to follow the laws as written. But this ruling is not going to go into effect for like a year, and then everyone can get the time to fix it and be the law that we had a debate about, the law that Congress passed, not the law that the IRS broke.
Tom, do you think that there will be an alternative, a viable alternative that opponents of Obamacare can live with?
There not only will be one alternative, there probably will be several. This is called a fluid environment where you have to find out what the traffic will bear. First, the Republicans need to get unified on 1 or 2 backup proposals, and then they're going to be negotiating with the president. There'll be a lot of posturing for the first week or 2. Oh, people are going to be put in desperate shape, and why can't you just give us a simple fix? But if the Republicans are disciplined and know what matters to them and what's important to the American people, they will get a better result, a better health care law going forward as a means to an end, not everything, because you can't overreach. There's some limitation on what can be achieved, but it'll be a better environment going forward.
And finally, Trevor, very quickly, why should Americans care about this case?
Well, we should care that the executive will break laws that aren't working the way he wants them to. That's what's happened a lot with Obamacare, and we know it. Everyone knows it. The administration knows it. They delayed the mandate. They delayed the employer mandate. They went contrary to the text of the statute because people didn't behave the way they thought they would. And just saying that in these situations, executives going forward of any party can just break laws that aren't working the way Congress wrote them is a very dangerous precedent. So people should care about reining in the executive in that way.
What an interesting example of the 3 legs of government, you know, the self-checking aspect of American government.
And the 4th branch, IRS.
Yes. Okay, Trevor Burrus and Tom Miller, thank you both for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Coming up, Pope Francis and Germany's Chancellor meet and exchange gifts at the Vatican. A choir from Cuba finds inspiration at D.C.'s National Shrine of the Immaculate Conception. Thanks for joining us on this Monday evening for EWTN News Nightly. I'm Brian Patrick. It's the first full week of Lent, and during this season we focus on overcoming temptation. Pope Francis encourages us to say no to idols and to live the gospel.
È iniziata la Quaresima.
At this week's Angelus address, the Pope recalled how Jesus successfully overcame temptations in hand-to-hand combat with Satan during his 40 days in the wilderness. Francis suggests keeping a copy of the gospel handy in our pockets or bags and reading it every day for a few minutes. The Holy Father calls members of the mafia to conversion. His appeal came during a speech to pilgrims from southern Italy, where organized crime thrives. Last year, Pope Francis visited their diocese, so these pilgrims came to Rome to thank him. Francis urged those in the mafia to open their hearts to the Lord and turn away from evil. He said, quote, "The Lord is waiting for you and the Church welcomes you." Pope Francis met with German Chancellor Angela Merkel this weekend. The Vatican meeting focused on the fight against poverty and international crises, including the violence in eastern Ukraine. Merkel told journalists the Holy Father gave her a lot of encouragement to find a peaceful solution to that conflict. Pope Francis presented Merkel with a medallion depicting St. Martin giving his coat to the needy. He says it can remind world leaders their job is to protect the poor. The German Chancellor gave Francis a CD with music by Johann Sebastian Bach. She also made a donation to help children who are affected by conflicts in the Middle East. A terror group urges Muslims to attack shopping malls here in the U.S., in Canada, Great Britain, and other Western countries. In a video, Al-Shabaab, linked to al-Qaeda, says its 2013 attack on Kenyan Mall was in retaliation for Kenyan military involvement in Somalia. That masked narrator warned of more attacks. He specifically mentioned the Mall of America near Minneapolis and West Edmonton Mall in Canada. Both malls say they've increased security. The U.S. Secretary of Homeland Security says this video is a new phase in the global terrorist threat. The families of 3 British schoolgirls believed to have traveled to Syria to join the Islamic State urge these girls to return home.
If you watch this, baby, please come home. Mum needs you more than anything in the world. You're our baby, and we just want you home. We want you safe.
The 15 and 16-year-old girls are said to be straight-A students. They left on Tuesday without leaving any messages. One of them recently had contact with a woman who left for Syria in 2013 to marry a militant fighter. The families say there were no signs the girls were interested in extremism. Officials say there's a growing trend of young girls and women interested in joining the Islamic State. Music could smooth diplomacy as the U.S. and Cuba try for a renaissance of relations. Jason Calvi reports on a Cuban choir touring the United States.
A complete chorus, including the high soprano and alto. This all-male choir is called Sine Nomine, Latin for without a name. This past week they sang at the Basilica of the Immaculate Conception.
I felt as if God was holding me in his hands. This place inspires me to sing the best I can.
The choir is now on their second tour of the United States, with stops coming up in Utah, Tennessee, and North Carolina. It's not just Renaissance chants you'll hear, but a little taste of Cuba as well. Leonor Suarez has directed the group since 2008.
It's a beautiful church. I don't think we've been in a church this big or this beautiful before. For us, it's a very, very profound experience.
A group called Classical Movements organized the tour. You can call it musical diplomacy.
We always believe that we can bridge gaps or divides between nations with music. We've seen it all over the world, not only just in Cuba, many other nations.
Music is the universal language. It's what brings people together.
And this choir hopes to continue to bring people together, one note at a time. The group Human Rights Watch says Cuba represses government critics and punishes dissent. Cuban-American Senator Marco Rubio says Cuba has recently arrested democracy activists. He says the Castro regime shows it's not willing to talk about bringing freedom to the island, but the award-winning choir didn't want to talk politics. They stuck to music.
All right, thank you, Jason Calvi. Up next, a film dealing positively with religious identity and vocation wins an Oscar. And it's perhaps the most iconic image from the Second World War. We have the story behind the Iwo Jima photograph. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I'm Brian Patrick, and it's good to have Melissa Henson with us with the Parents Television Council. It promotes family-friendly entertainment. Melissa, YouTube just recently released YouTube for Kids. It's a mobile app that shows kids stuff that's only appropriate for them. What did you think of it? Have you had a chance to review it?
Well, I'm encouraged, but it's yet to be tested. Part of the problem with YouTube is that there's a lot of great content out there, but of course you don't know what you're going to be hit with in the suggested videos on the side or what's going to come in the advertising after. So for them to portion off some of the videos that are safe for kids, I'm very encouraged, but as I said, it's yet to be tested, so we need to wait and see how good they are about enforcing that.
It's only available for Android right now because Google owns all this, so but eventually it should be available for the Apple products as well.
Right, presumably, and all the other applications like Roku and Apple TV and so forth.
So we're using all this technology to watch programming now, so cable almost is passé, but a lot of families still have cable. How can parents protect their children from inappropriate programming.
Yeah, it is a challenge because a lot of us bring cable into our homes because that's the only way we're going to have access to family-friendly content like EWTN or like, Disney Junior or what have you. So it is difficult. We do encourage people, though, to try using some of these other devices like Roku or like Apple TV to get around some of the content issues because that way you have better control over the content. You can block channels, of course, but you're still paying for the channels that you might find offensive, even if you do that.
There's a lot of offensive programming. It's getting worse on cable. What is the family, the Parents Television Council doing, and what response are you getting?
Yeah, well, we are trying to put up the floodgates or stop the flood of inappropriate content coming into our homes. One thing that we are doing is contacting advertisers about the content of the shows that they're advertising on and let them know that by advertising on those shows, they are essentially endorsing the content. We're also encouraging people to take action, get involved, file petitions, for example, against networks that might be airing the most offensive content. There's a lot of ways to get involved, but we often say silence gives consent. So if you're concerned about it, please do speak up.
And turn it off.
And turn it off.
Turn off the trash. Melissa Henson with the Parents Television Council. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, Birdman topped this year's Academy Awards, but another Oscar honor is being called a welcome surprise for Catholics. Ida took home the Oscar for Best Foreign Language Film. The black and white Polish film is about a young Franciscan raised in a convent who is preparing to take her final vows. When she discovers she was born Jewish and her parents were killed by Nazis, she is sent on a journey of self-discovery. Decent Film Stephen Greydonis compliments Ida for artful treatment of religious identity and vocation. And this week marks the 70th anniversary of one of the World War II's bloodiest battles. AP photographer Joe Rosenthal's iconic photo of Iwo Jima became one of the most enduring photos ever. Our Catherine Zeltner has the story behind that picture.
Foot by foot is the bitter and bloody story of the advance on Iwo Jima.
The capture of Iwo Jima on February 23, 1945. A battle memorialized in the image of U.S. Marines raising the flag on the island. At the request of military commanders, 2 flags were raised that day. The AP's Joe Rosenthal was on hand to capture the second. When Rosenthal started receiving praise for the powerful image, he thought it was a different picture he shot that day that was earning the accolades. That confusion led to a popular myth that the photo was staged.
The flag starts to go up, and Joe raises his camera. Janouse turns on his motion picture camera, and Joe shoots the picture. Joe doesn't know whether he's got it because of the way it happened. It happened so quickly. So he gets the Marines together, and he poses them under the flag, waving now, and he gets about 20 or 30 Marines, and they're waving their helmets and guns, and he calls that his gung-ho picture. Okay, fellas, give it the old gung-ho. And there's a lot of banter back and forth, and he makes the picture. When he gets to Guam, Joe is getting slapped on the back. What an incredible picture. And he had received messages from New York about what a wonderful picture. But he didn't know what the picture was because they didn't tell him what it was. He wasn't sure he made the flag picture, but he knew he made the gung-ho picture. And so he thought it was the gung-ho picture that everybody was saying, what a wonderful Jim. Joe, did you pose it? And Joe said, yeah, because he thought it was the gung-ho picture. Then he sees tear sheets that had been shipped to Guam by this time, and there's the flag picture. He said, oh, I didn't pose that picture. Damage done.
Rosenthal's reputation survived, and he was awarded a Pulitzer for that iconic image. But as he explained before his death in 2013, the image represents more than just a snapshot in time.
This picture has done quite a lot to attract attention of people to what those men were doing out there. And the story, they then want to get more of the story of what kind of a battle it was, what their courage and tenacity was.
This week marks the 70th anniversary of the Battle of Iwo Jima, and Rosenthal's image also lives on as the U.S. Marine Corps War Memorial in Arlington, Virginia. Catherine Zeltner, EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you, Catherine. The greatest generation, true heroes. Until tomorrow, we encourage you to like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, watch again anytime you like on EWTN's YouTube page. For the EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Brian Patrick. Good night and God bless you.